Welcome everyone to another episode of Archetype Review. In this video we are going to be looking at the Naturia Archetype. The Naturia Archetype began way back in the introduction of the dual terminal around the 5Ds era. And since then, the support for the archetype has been fairly consistent with a lot of support every now and then, which is overall a pretty good thing. Naturia monsters are thematically centered around the idea of nature or environment or just wildlife in general, as the name suggests, being Naturia. Because of this, they all do have one shared attribute, being Earth attribute. Types on the other hand vary a lot more, with the majority of them being either insect type or plant type, and a few beasts here and there, and even a few dragons and rocks. The majority of their effects trigger when the opponent just simply does something. When they either summon a monster, activate a spell or trap, or some of them just have effects that downright negate these effects. Because of this, it leaves the opponent with a gamble. Should they either do an action and trigger a Naturia effect, or should they omit undoing an action? Saying all this kind of shows why the archetype isn't exactly meta, because it depends on what your opponent does. Any archetype that simply depends on what the opponent does, by nature is going to be a little less effective than any archetype that gives you full control. Regardless, it's not a bad archetype by any means. I have reviewed plenty of other archetypes that have just been pure trash compared to this one, so this one is definitely a step up. And the last thing I will say is that for the nature of these videos, for now, I'm going to actually not explore these chronologically like what I did for previous videos, simply because a lot of people have actually recommended maybe not to do that and instead take a different approach. Without further ado, let's get started. So the first monster is Naturia ANTJAW. This one is an Earth level 2 insect monster with 400 attack and 200 defense. Its effect says when your opponent special summons a monster, you can special summon one level 3 or lower Naturia monster from your deck. Like I was saying before, this is a common theme among Naturia monsters. When your opponent does something, bam, an effect activates. This one specifically is not horrible, but it's not amazing either. The great thing is that it does let you special summon a monster from the deck, and any effect that does that just naturally is very good. The downside to the effect is that the majority of the time the opponent is going to be special summoning monsters on their turn as opposed to yours. Meaning if they special summon a monster, it's because they're extending their plays and special summoning most likely from the extra deck. Yes, you get your free monster, but the problem is that they're all going to be wiped out by powerful extra deck monster effects or the battle phase, which means it's not exactly a saving grace in many ways and it's not going to let you extend plays. Overall though, it is okay for what it does. The next monster is Naturia Bamboo Shoot. It's an Earth level 5 plant monster with 2000 attack and defense. Its effect says if this card is tribute summoned by tributing a Naturia monster, while this card remains face up on the field, your opponent cannot activate spell or trap cards. This is a spectacular lockdown effect. The fact that it locks down your opponent from activating any spell or trap cards, pretty amazing. The one downside is that it does depend on tribute summoning, which is a concept that's been horribly outdated since the introduction of it way back in the beginning. Despite that though, at least it only requires one, and its stats are, while not great for a level 5, they're not horrible either. Because a monster is going to be summoned on your turn to activate its lockdown effect, that means that your opponent effectively is shut out of activating quick play spells and traps for the remainder of your turn. On their turn, they either have to wait for the battle phase to get rid of this monster or activate a monster effect to get rid of it. Which means if they wait for the battle phase, they cannot extend plays during the main phase 1, which is actually really good for you. It essentially gives you another free turn. Because of all this is definitely an important card, an important key playmaker to put in your Naturia deck. Despite it being a tribute monster depending on tribute summon, some decks actually run up to 3 of this one, believe it or not. So yeah, this one is great. The next one is Naturia Beans. It's an Earth level 2 plant monster with 100 attack and 1200 defense. Its effect says once per turn this card cannot be destroyed by battle. When this face-up card is selected as an attack target, inflict 500 damage to your opponent. Monster effects that revolve around the idea of not being destroyed once per turn per battle or even twice per turn per battle were coming around the time of the 5Ds era, so this one is not really unique in terms of that. Cards such as Gyroid and Dark Resonator were already out, but the big plus from them is the fact that they had better stats. In addition, cards like Dark Resonator specifically were also tuners. This card's attack is very pathetic at a measly 100, although the 500 burn damage is a little bit more appreciated. Despite that though, it's not a card that really fits in the theme of Naturia in general, so that's why most people tend to avoid it. The next one is Naturia Beetle. It's an Earth level 4 insect monster with 400 attack and 1800 defense. Its effect says switch the original attack and defense of this card each time a spell card is activated. A 400 attack monster that occasionally switches to 1800 and then back to 400 is one thing. An 1800 beatstick is another thing. So you cannot be a complete idiot and just run an 1800 beat stick, and that card technically is better than this one. So yeah, moving on to the next one. Naturia Butterfly is an Earth level 3 insect monster with 500 attack and 1200 defense. Its effect says once per turn when your opponent's monster declares an attack, you can send the top card of your deck to the graveyard and negate that attack. A secondary role of Naturia monsters that I haven't really mentioned yet is the fact that they do send monsters from their deck to the graveyard. Milling from the deck is never a bad idea, especially nowadays. But the effect of this monster specifically is lackluster at best. While the protection is nice, it's very limited to simply just once per turn, so most people tend to not really run it in combination with its mediocre effect as well as fairly bad stats. Naturia Cherries is an Earth level 1 plant tuner with 200 attack and defense. The effect says, if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard by your opponent's card, including by battle card effect or by being destroyed, you can special summon up to 2 Naturia Cherries from your deck in face down defense position. The swarming is very effective and very much appreciated, in addition to it being a tuner, which means that it can extend into further summons that I'll talk about in just a little bit. This one is a key play component in Naturia decks that should always be ran at 3, simply because it's a tuner in combination with its effective swarming capabilities. Yeah, so run 3 of these and never any less, please. The next one is Naturia Cliff. It's an Earth level 4 rock monster with 1500 attack and 1000 defense. The effect says when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 level 4 or lower Naturia monster from your deck in face-up attack position. This is outright one of the best floating effects that a bunch of archetypes actually wish they had. A lot of monsters that have effects when they're sent from the field to the graveyard typically let you search for monsters, basically from the deck to the hand. Cards that float and special summon into other monsters or archetype monsters of itself typically have effects that have to do with battle destruction. This one is a combination of both, however. It does not need to be destroyed by battle. Essentially, anytime it's sent from the field to the graveyard, meaning by destruction, either by battle or card effect, or used as a material as well for like a synchro summon or any other thing as well, honestly very effective. It's a combination of the effect of when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, as well as special summoning a monster as opposed to adding it to your hand. So this one is also a big 3-up because it's definitely one of the common floaters and play extenders of the archetype. The next one is Naturia Cosmo Beat. It's an Earth level 2 plant tuner with 1000 attack and 700 defense. The effect says, when your opponent normal summons or sets a monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. This one's a bit debatable among many people, but the fact that it's a tuner in combination with a special summoning condition, that is pretty good. It does disrupt your opponent's extended play simply because you can just pop it onto the field anytime the normal summon or set a monster, so that's pretty good. It's a little debatable among people how many you should actually run, but typically it wouldn't hurt you to run 1 or 2 copies. The next one is Naturia Dragonfly. It's an Earth level 4 insect monster with 1200 attack and 400 defense. The effect says, this card cannot be destroyed by battle with a monster that has 2000 or more attack. This card gains 200 attack for each Naturia monster in your graveyard. This is a very intriguing effect simply because it has a starting attack of 1200, which means by the time you get 4 Naturia monsters in your graveyard, which really isn't all that hard simply because Naturia monsters focus on self-milling as well, but by the time you reach 4 Naturia monsters, this thing is already at 2000 attack. Think of part of its effect like this. If there are 4 or more Naturia monsters in your graveyard, this card cannot be destroyed by battle. That's pretty solid because of its 2000 attack, plus it can actually generally go to attacks higher than 2000 attack. It's a really good monster for what it does, and it's nice to just have a solid beatdown monster for some attack in there, so this is definitely one you want to consider running, although 3 might be a little too much. The next one is Naturia Eggplant. It's an Earth level 2 plant monster with 1000 attack and 700 defense. The effect says when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can select 1 Naturia monster in your graveyard, except Naturia Eggplant, and add it to your hand. A pretty okay card. It's nice and nifty that it does allow you to basically not go minus when it goes to the graveyard because you do get a card back to the hand. The cards of special summon are generally just a lot more better. This one might be a good one of, but aside from that, maybe not so much. It's okay, it's not horrible, it's not great. Naturia Fruitfly is an Earth level 3 insect monster with 800 attack and 1500 defense. The effect says all face-up monsters your opponent controls lose 300 attack and defense for each face-up Naturia monster you control. Once per turn, you can select 1 face-up monster your opponent controls with 0 defense and take control of it until the end phase. While the second effect is incredibly specific and not exactly that great because Naturia monsters don't exactly focus on getting opponent's monster's defense to 0, the first effect is actually fairly good. Minus 300 attack and defense for each Naturia monster you control is actually pretty okay. The fact that on average you should be having approximately 3 Naturias on the field means a big whopping minus 900 attack and defense for each monster your opponent controls. This gives you great stat advantage simply because if you didn't already notice, Naturia monsters don't exactly have the best attacks and defense. Stat wise, they're pretty mediocre at best. But this monster really makes up for it. It's a card worth running a little bit just to give you a little bit more of an edge in terms of stats, but maybe not 3 of once again. The next one is Naturia Guardian. It's an Earth level 4 plant monster with 1600 attack and 400 defense. The effect says when your opponent normal summons a monster, this card gains 300 attack until the end phase. Cards that focus on simply increasing only their own attack and defense for a turn nowadays are not really that great. This one is no exception. Occasionally it'll go up to 1900, but by that point, do you really need to? No. Especially because it'll only activate during your opponent's turn, and you won't really be able to make great attacks with it on your own turn. It's pretty bad. If you're looking for cards in terms of stat advantage for you, you're better off running a Naturia FRUITFLY or a Naturia DRAGONFLY as opposed to a Naturia Guardian, so yeah, just pass on this one. Naturia HORNEEDLE is an Earth level 4 insect monster with 1800 attack and 100 defense. The effect says when your opponent special summons a monster, you contribute 1 face-up Naturia monster you control except this card to destroy the special summon monster. It's recommended to never run this one more than 1. 1 is okay on the deck because it does have good solid stats. It's a pretty average card because for one it does have pretty good starting stats at 1800 for a Naturia is actually pretty impressive. In addition, negating and destroying special summon monsters is always a good effect, although it's very specific and does cost you a lot. Essentially, it's a monster effect of a Horn of Heaven, which Horn of Heaven, although not a horrible card, it's definitely not a great card either. It's pretty cool, but there's definitely plenty other Naturia monsters that are a lot worse than this. Naturia HYDRANGEA is an Earth level 5 plant monster with 1900 attack and 2000 defense. The effect says, if the effect of a Naturia monster you control was activated during this turn, you can special summon this card from your hand. It's a little mediocre, not the best special summoning condition, could be worse, but it's typically when you want to pass. It's also a tribute monster, which means that you're basically going to rely on the special summon because there's no way you would ever want to tribute summon for this card. Generally, you should pass on this. Naturia Ladybug is an Earth level 1 insect monster with 100 attack and defense. The effect says when you synchro summon a Naturia synchro monster, you can special summon this card from your graveyard. During your main phase, you contribute this card to select 1 face-up Naturia monster you control. It gains 1000 attack until the end phase. While there are plenty of great Naturia synchro monsters, the effect is a little too specific and not exactly great for utilization. It's one that's often overlooked simply because it's not really that worthwhile to put in the deck, so typically you want to not really run this card. Naturia Mantis is an Earth level 4 insect monster with 1700 attack and 1500 defense. The effect says when your opponent normal summons a monster, you can send 1 Naturia monster from your hand to the graveyard to destroy that monster. It's a little useful, but it's not exactly one of the best counters in terms of Naturia monsters. There's plenty of other monsters that just have better effects overall, but at least its stats aren't horrible, so you might want to run one, but typically it's better off not to. Naturia MARRON is an Earth level 3 plant monster with 1200 attack and 700 defense. Its effect says when this card is normal summoned, you can send 1 Naturia monster from your deck to the graveyard. Once per turn, you can target 2 Naturia monsters in your graveyard, shuffle both those targets from the deck, then draw 1 card. An Armageddon-like effect in the normal summon, in addition to letting you draw a card by simply sending 2 Naturia monsters back to the deck from the graveyard, is actually pretty good. I wish his stats were a little bit better, but you can't really complain. It does help to run 1 or 2 of these, preferably just 1, because it does actually offer a few more cards to you in your advantage, so yeah, not bad at all. Naturia Mosquito is an Earth level 1 insect monster with 200 attack and 300 defense. The effect says while you control another face-up Naturia monster, your opponent cannot select this card as an attack target. Your opponent takes any battle damage you would have taken from battles involving a face-up Naturia monster you control except this card. This is honestly a really stupid battle protection effect. There's a much better cards out there for other archetypes, and the sad part is that Naturia monsters kinda got the shittiness. Yeah, it's just not a good card. Don't bother with it. Naturia Pineapple is an Earth level 2 plant monster with 100 attack and defense. The effect says all face-up monsters you control are treated as plant type. If this card is in your graveyard during your standby phase and you control no spells or traps, you can special summon this card. This effect cannot be activated if you control a face-up Naturia Pineapple, or if you have monsters in your graveyard that are not plant type or beast type. There's plenty of problems with it. For one, the last effect is very weird for being a Naturia card. It says if there are no plant or beast type, there are more insects than beast types. You know what this means? No synergy. Essentially, if you're running a Naturia deck, which will naturally have plants, insects, some beasts and rocks here and there, that means that you're not going to be able to use this effect if even one insect Naturia is in the graveyard. Its effect should remind you of another much more useful card known as TREEBORN Frog, simply because TREEBORN Frog's effect says you can special summon it during your standby phase if you control no other TREEBORN Frogs and no spells and traps, very similar to Pineapple. I honestly don't know why they added that extra limitation to it, it just made the card a lot more worse. So there's that problem, most people tend not to run this, and for good reason. The next one is Naturia Pumpkin. It's an Earth level 4 plant monster with 1400 attack and 800 defense. The effect says when this card is normal summoned, if your opponent controls a monster, you can special summon one Naturia monster from your hand. It has the potential to offer instant synchros, but aside from that, it's not really that great because it does require another resource from the hand, so you're not really going plus with this. It's average at best, but it's really useful to just overlook it. Naturia Ragweed is an Earth level 3 plant monster with 1200 attack and 2000 defense. Its effect reads, when your opponent draws a card except during the draw phase, you can send this face-up card you control to the graveyard to draw 2 cards. This has to be one of the most specific draw 2 cards I've ever seen in my entire life. It heavily depends on your opponent running a pot of whatever, because obviously it doesn't activate during the draw phase. In addition, you also have to send this card to the graveyard. At least it has 2000 defense, but nowadays that doesn't really mean so much, does it? Yeah, let's just move on. Naturia Rock is an Earth level 3 rock monster with 1200 attack and 1200 defense. The effect says when a trap card is activated, you can send the top card of your deck to the graveyard to special summon this card from your hand. It was okay back in the day, nowadays traps are naturally used a lot less, which means that you won't really have too many opportunities to special summon the card. That leaves it to be just a regular 1200 attack monster that you can normal summon or set whenever you can. Yeah, it's not really that great. Naturia Rosewhip is an Earth level 3 plant tuner with 400 attack and 1700 defense. The effect says your opponent can only activate one spell or trap card per turn. Honestly, pretty good. The fact that it's a tuner with a pretty decent lockdown effect, yeah, that makes it really useful. It's definitely no Naturia Bamboo Shoe, but it's obviously the next best thing. Yeah, strong recommendation to run at least one of these. Naturia SPIDERFANG is an Earth level 4 insect monster with 2100 attack and 400 defense. The effect says this card cannot declare an attack unless your opponent activated a spell, trap, spell/trap effect, or monster effect this turn. Basically, if they activated anything this turn, it can attack. Yeah, it's not a good card. If you're looking for a high attack level 4 monster, run either HORNEEDLE or DRAGONFLY. Those two are naturally just better cards, so this one just, yeah, don't run it. Naturia Stag Beetle is an Earth level 6 insect monster with 2200 attack and 1500 defense. The effect says once per turn during the battle step or damage step of this card's attack, when your opponent activates a card or effect, you can select one Naturia monster in your graveyard, special summon that monster from the graveyard. This card is way too specific, and even then it's not a good effect. Essentially what it's saying is this card has to attack and your opponent has to activate a card in response to this card's attack to special summon a monster from your graveyard. That's way too convoluted, way too specific, it's just not good. Think of a scenario, you're attacking with this card, your opponent activates a Mirror Force, so you basically have to chain this to Mirror Force as a chain link too. You special summon a monster, and then this card along with the newly special summon monster gets blasted. What? Naturia STINKBUG is an Earth level 3 insect tuner with 200 attack and 500 defense. The effect says when a face-up Naturia monster you control is selected as an attack target, you can send this face-up card you control to the graveyard to negate that attack and end the battle phase. This card would be a lot better if it was simply a hand effect, but the fact that it's not makes it a little too difficult to actually activate its effect. You need to somehow get this card on the field, which basically gives your opponent the impression that, oh, you have this effect. If it was in the hand, it would be secretive and it saves you a summon, so yeah, they kind of dropped the ball with this one. Naturia Strawberry is an Earth level 4 plant monster with 1600 attack and 1200 defense. The effect says once per turn when your opponent normal or special summons a monster, target one of those monsters, this card gains 100 attack times the level of that monster until the end phase. Just run Dragonfly. That's all I have to say. This one is way too specific. Next. The next one is Naturia Sunflower. It's an Earth level 2 plant type monster with 500 attack and 0 defense. The effect says you can tribute this card and one Naturia monster to negate the activation of an effect monster your opponent controls and destroy it. Yeah, this is bad. You're getting rid of 2 to negate 1 and destroy it, so you're going -1. Oh my gosh, there's plenty other better cards that negate effect monsters' effects, and this one is definitely not a good one. Naturia TULIP is an Earth level 2 plant tuner monster with 600 attack and 1500 defense. Its effect says when you control this face-up card, each time your opponent activates a spell or trap card, all face-up Naturia monsters you control gain 500 attack until the end phase. Once again, if you want stat advantage, run Dragonfly and FRUITFLY because those are going to be your better Naturia monsters for improving stats. Although this one's a tuner, there's also much better Naturia tuners as well, so this one is a big pass. Naturia Vein is an Earth level 1 plant tuner monster with 200 attack and 300 defense. The effect says you can tribute this card and one Naturia monster to negate the activation of your opponent's spell or trap card and destroy it. It's basically Sunflower but for spell and traps. Once again, not good. You're going -1 to negate and destroy one spell or trap, and yeah, great. You just lost 2 cards and they lost 1. Naturia White Oak is an Earth level 4 plant monster with 1800 attack and 1400 defense. The effect says when this card is targeted by an opponent's card effect, you can send this face-up card you control to the graveyard to special summon 2 level 4 or lower Naturia monsters from your deck. They cannot declare an attack and are destroyed during your end phase. While the effect might seem good on paper, keep in mind that it's completely up to the opponent to choose to target this card. More than likely, they're not going to target this card with a card effect, simply because the effect is actually good, so they wouldn't be a complete idiot to do that. It's good that it does have solid attack as well at 1800 for a Naturia monster. It's up there with HORNEEDLE, but it's not worth it. It's just better to run HORNEEDLE in addition to some Dragonflies as well. Now we're going to move on to the extra deck monsters, meaning all just synchros and fusions because they don't have any others besides those. But if you have not actually been familiar with this archetype, I think you're going to be thoroughly impressed by this. The first one is Naturia Barkion. It's an Earth level 6 Dragon Synchro monster with 2500 attack and 1800 defense. The materials include 1 Earth Tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner Earth monsters. The effect reads, during either player's turn when a trap card is activated, you can banish 2 cards from your graveyard, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. This card must be face up on the field to activate and to resolve this effect. This one by itself is not entirely impressive. It's actually one of the weaker effects because it specifically focuses on trap cards, which are not really played all that often. But the negate is actually really good. Typically when you look at negate effects, they require discarding a card or getting rid of a card on your side of the field, like tributing something, or even paying a lot of life points. But this one focuses on just cards from your graveyard, which is actually really good in itself. Although it does contradict Dragonfly's effect and a few others that do actually benefit from having cards in the graveyard, it in itself is not bad. It's actually pretty solid too in terms of stats for a level 6, so yeah, not bad. The next one is Naturia Beast. This one is an Earth level 5 Beast Synchro monster with 2200 attack and 1700 defense. The materials include 1 Earth Tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner Earth monsters. And the effect says when a spell card is activated, quick effect, you can send the top 2 cards of your deck to the graveyard, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. This card must be face up on the field to activate and to resolve this effect. This is a much better effect. Naturally, spell cards are going to be used a lot more than trap cards, which already makes this card naturally better. Also, the big plus is that this effect does have a lot more synergy with the archetype, sending cards from the deck to the graveyard to negate and destroy. Honestly, I don't know why they didn't do that with Barkion. They should have just done the same effect of sending 2 cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard to negate and destroy a trap card. So I think they kind of dropped the ball with that, which is why Barkion is not really amazing. Nowhere near as good as Naturia Beast, because this one is definitely a big plus. So yeah, this is a key staple and component to the Naturia archetype, so make sure to run this one. The next one is Naturia EXTERIO'S. It's an Earth level 10 Beast Fusion monster with 2800 attack and 2400 defense. The materials include Naturia Beast plus Naturia Barkion, the 2 that I just mentioned. And the effect says, a fusion summon of this card can only be conducted with the above fusion material monsters. While this card is face up on the field, you can negate the activation of a spell or trap card and destroy it by removing from play 1 card from your graveyard, then sending the top card of your deck to the graveyard. This is no doubt one of the best negate effects in the entire game. It's ridiculous. The cost is pretty much non-existent. In fact, it's kind of a plus. The cost is a benefit to you as well. You're banishing a card, but also sending a card from your deck to the graveyard, which means you're actually never running out of resources to use this card's negate. It's also not a once per turn, which is a huge plus as well. The one downside, and you may have already noticed, is the materials to summon this card. It does need 2 synchros, being Beast and Barkion, to actually be summoned. But there's actually a few easier ways to do this. If you use cards like Miracle Synchro Fusion or the Earth Hexil Fusion, it does simplify the process a lot more and it makes it a lot easier to bring out the card. Usually when pro players think of Naturia decks, they think of this card, because this card is the definition of a huge boss monster. 2800 attacker, pretty much negate any spell and trap, not once per turn while it's on the field. This relies on your opponent summoning a monster that has more than 2800 attack and destroying you by battle, or by using an effect monster. That really limits their options a lot, and honestly it's really good for you, right? Yeah, run this card because it's going to be amazing for you. The next one is Naturia GAIASTRIO. It's an Earth level 10 rock fusion monster with 3200 attack and 2100 defense. Its materials include 2 Earth Synchro monsters, and its effect says during either player's turn, when a card or effect is activated that targets exactly 1 card on the field and no other cards, you can send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. It has some pros compared to Naturia Exterio, but overall a few more cons. The materials are a little bit more generic compared to Exterio, although not completely generic because it does say Earth Synchro. Another plus is that it does include monster effects, but the bad side is that it has to specifically target 1 card on the field. Then the bigger downside is the fact that you have to send a card from your hand to the graveyard to negate the activation, as opposed to sending a card from your deck to the graveyard or banishing something from your graveyard, which makes it a little hard to utilize. It's also not once per turn, so that's good, but also another plus compared to Exterio is the fact that it has 400 more attack. Overall, Exterio is a better card, I do realize that, but this one is not a bad alternative if you sometimes have to actually run it. If you can somehow get both this card plus Exterio on the field, you basically won the game, because you are essentially locking down your opponent. Yeah, that essentially gives you the game. The next one is Naturia LANDOISE. It's an Earth level 7 rock synchro monster with 2350 attack and 1600 defense, very oddly specific attack. The materials include 1 Earth Tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner Earth monsters, and the effect says while this card is face up on the field, you can send 1 spell card from your hand to the graveyard to negate the activation of an effect monster's effect and destroy it. So just like how Barkion is for traps, Beast is for spells, this one here is for effect monsters. But the cost is outright very strange to me. I don't know where the hell they thought of this effect, but it's incredibly strange. Why do you have to send a spell card from your hand to the graveyard to negate an effect monster's effect? What? That's so odd. Obviously Beast is the best of the 3 because it just sends cards from your deck to the graveyard, while Barkion is probably the second best in terms of cost because you banish a card. This one is making you go minus a card to negate and destroy a card, so you're sticking with the same amount. You're going neutral basically, so yeah, I suppose it's okay, but I mean, it doesn't hurt to run it, right? And the last extra deck monster is Naturia Leodrake. It's an Earth level 9 Beast Synchro monster with 3000 attack and 1800 defense. The materials include 1 Earth Tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner Earth monsters. And that's it. It's a vanilla. Okay, next. Alright, moving on to the spell and trap lineup, which there's actually not that many of, believe it or not. The first one is Barkion's Bark. Barkion meaning the Naturia Synchro monster Barkion. It's a normal spell card which says, activate only if you control a face-up Naturia monster. Your opponent cannot activate trap cards this turn. It's not bad, I mean it does block trap cards, which is essentially going to be the card that's used most often during your turn, so there's the benefit to that, but overall as a card, I mean, you don't really want to rely on this. Plus Naturia monsters generally just have negate effects on their own. It might be better with that. The next one is EXTERIO'S FANG. It's a counter trap card that says activate only if you control a face-up Naturia monster and have at least 1 card in your hand. Negate the activation of an opponent's spell trap and destroy it. Then send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard. Okay, this card sucks. You have to send a card from your hand. Honestly, I feel like it would just be a pretty good card if it said activate only if you control a face-up Naturia monster. That's it for the first sentence. And then negate the effect of an opponent's spell or trap card and destroy it. That's it. Why do you have to have a card in your hand and discard it? That just makes it way too specific and way too big of a cost, you know? Yeah, that's not good. The next one is LANDOISE's Luminous Moss. It's a normal spell card that says activate only if you control a face-up Naturia monster. The opponent's effect monsters cannot activate their effects this turn. I'm sure you saw the theme here of BARKION'S, EXTERIO'S, and LANDOISE's, but one thing I will say is that this one is definitely a pretty okay one as opposed to a bad one from the other two, because locking down effect monsters' effects nowadays with so many quick effects going onto the field with negates on the field, this one's pretty good. Locks down effect monsters for the whole turn, so that's pretty good on its own, yeah. This one, not horrible. It might help to run maybe one of this, but any more than that, it's just too underpowered. Next up is Leo Drake's Mane. It's another normal spell card that says select one face-up Naturia monster you control. Its attack becomes 3000 and its effects are negated until the end phase. Yeah, it could be better. The 3000 attack might look impressive, but you'll see more than likely it's not going to be enough to do what you want to do in terms of getting rid of your opponent's cards in the field. Focus more on getting rid of your opponent's field as opposed to just targeting one monster and basically making it crazy on steroids, you know, so yeah. Naturia Forest is a field spell card that says if you negate the activation of a card your opponent controls, you can add one level 3 or lower Naturia monster from your deck to your hand. It's good that it gives you more cards to work with, but it could have been better. It's an outdated spell card that's a field spell, so there's that downside. Hopefully they get a better field spell when the time comes, because this one by itself is just a little too underpowered, you know? Naturia's Sacred Tree is a continuous trap card that says, if this card is sent to the graveyard, add one Naturia card from your deck to your hand except Naturia's Sacred Tree. You can only use one of the following effects of Naturia's Sacred Tree per turn and only once that turn. The first one says you contribute one Earth Insect type monster, special summon one level 4 or lower Earth Plant type monster from your deck. The second one says you contribute one Earth Plant type monster, special summon one level 4 or lower Earth Insect type monster from your deck. The two effects and bullet points are actually a little bit underwhelming and underpowered, a little bit too slow, especially for continuous trap card, but this card is actually okay in a Naturia deck simply because of its first effect. It says if this card is sent to the graveyard, add one blah blah blah. So the reason why it's good is because it doesn't have to be on the field. Because Naturia monsters focus on sending cards from the deck to the graveyard, if you just add a couple of these into the deck and essentially mill it from the deck, the effect triggers, which means you get a free Naturia card from your deck to the hand, and it's any Naturia card, not just a monster, which is actually pretty good. So in some cases it is actually useful to run this and essentially just mill them, but it's going to be a little bit underpowered if you end up drawing into the card because you have a Garnet now. So yeah, you kind of got to take the risk here, you know? The last two cards are related cards to the archetype, not actually Naturia cards, but they are related. The first one is Leo, the Keeper of the Sacred Tree. It's an Earth level 10 beast synchro monster with 3100 attack and 1900 defense, and the materials include one tuner, plus one or more non-tuner monsters, basically generic, and then the effect says your opponent cannot target this card with card effects except during your main phase 2. It's good for a 3100 attacker, you know, basically prohibits your opponent from targeting it almost forever, very specific in terms of when it can be done. So it doesn't hurt to run it in case you might need it, but I mean, it's not amazing. The reason why it's related is because it does actually kind of look like an upgraded version of Naturia Leo Drake, although there's been a lot of just talk among the community as terms of like, what the hell this actually has to do with Naturia, you know? It looks similar, and it does say Keeper of the Sacred Tree being nature-based, so there is that. And the last one, which I'm not going to read the whole entire effect because it has absolutely nothing to do with Naturia, is Ritual Beast Ulti Gaiapelio. I'm only including this one here because you can actually see in the artwork that the previous monster I just mentioned, being Leo the Keeper of the Sacred Tree, is actually seen on this artwork as the monster that the person, that the psychic, yeah, whatever, you get what I'm saying, is writing. So yeah, I just want to include that like as a little fun fact, but I'm not going to read the whole long effect because it has nothing to do with that. So yeah, moving on. So that is basically it for the Naturia archetype. As far as an archetype by itself, it's okay. It does have to combine with other cards that are simply just outside of the archetype, usually with things that are centered around the theme of being plant, insect, or earth-based cards. A few recommendations that'll make the deck actually a little bit better would be, for one, batting a copy of Botanical Lion is not bad, just for some pure power and beatdown strategy. In addition, putting the card Sniffus in there as well as Glow Up Bulb is honestly not a bad idea. Lonefire Blossom is also not a bad card to put because it just simply is a general plant support card, so that's pretty good. Like I was saying before, the ultimate goal of a Naturia deck is to summon the extra deck monsters, being the synchros and especially the fusions, because those are amazing. Beast in itself is pretty good, and Exterio is honestly amazing, and so is Gaiastrio in some ways. This is why you also want to run cards such as Miracle Synchro Fusion and the Earth Hexial Fusion, because they do actually make it a little bit easier to bring these cards on the field. Regardless, you do still want to run some Naturia tuners or even other Earth tuners in general, because that'll actually help a little bit. And lastly, because all Naturia monsters are Earth naturally, they also have general Earth support. There's cards like Grand Soil the Elemental Lord, even Gigantes can be useful in some aspects, and Giant Rat, although in general, Naturia Eclipse is just a much better version of Giant Rat. Specifically with plant support, you can also run cards like Mark of the Rose, and even Queen of Thorns might help, and even Titanial, Princess of Camellias, might be useful in some ways. That's about it for the archetype. The cool thing is that because they all have Earth attribute support, they actually have a lot of flexibility and versatility in terms of what combos they can work with. So don't focus on just putting Naturia cards, because that in itself is going to be a little bit underpowered. You want to use some of these cards that I mentioned here near the end, because that's going to be where it's really useful. That's about it for the episode. As always, let me know what you think of this video, recommendations, as well as what you think of the Naturia archetype to give your own opinion. So if you enjoyed this video in any way, please be sure to leave a like. I'd appreciate it very much. Thank you, and as always, I will see you all next time. Bye bye everyone, have a great and of course a fantastic day.